The night had settled into that kind of cold darkness that swallowed sound and blurred the line between earth and sky, a thick lunar fog rolling low over the pines as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The border stones glimmered faintly under the pallid moon, ancient markers half buried in moss and shadow, whispering with the weight of old rules and older dangers. And there, in the loneliness where the territory began and the world beyond ended, a small, trembling shape shuddered against the wind. A toddler, barely standing, barely breathing, barely holding on to the soaked blanket wrapped around fragile shoulders. The child's soft sobs rose and fell with the wind, thin and broken, like a dying heartbeat beneath the howl of distant trees. It was the cry that reached him first. The Alpha had been patrolling the ridge alone, preferring silence to the company of guards tonight, the lingering tension in his spine telling him something was wrong long before the sound reached him. His boots crushed frost with every step, releasing small sparks of scent that only a wolf of his rank could truly understand. But even that quiet sensory rhythm broke the moment the cry drifted through the trees, wet, frightened, desperate. He froze. The moonlight carved a pale line along his jaw, revealing the tightening of muscles that rarely betrayed anything at all. His breath slowed, sharpened, became something like instinct wrapped in steel. That sound didn't belong here. That small, pleading voice didn't belong anywhere near wolf territory unless someone wanted to start a war or leave a warning soaked in innocence. He moved before thinking, long strides cutting through the fog, cape brushing the ground like a living shadow. The cold clung to him, but he barely felt it. Alphas were carved from something tougher than air and winter, but even so, something in that cry pierced him with surprising ease. The trees grew denser as he approached the border, the air heavier, as if the forest knew what stood there and feared it. And when he stepped between two massive trunks, he saw the child clearly for the first time, tiny feet bare against the frozen earth, trembling fingers gripping the frayed edge of a blanket, eyes swollen and red from crying too long, too hard, too alone. The Alpha felt something inside him stutter. Not externally. His face remained carved in that stoic, unbreakable mask that intimidated warriors twice his size, but internally, deep beneath the disciplined silence he had spent years reinforcing. Something shifted. Wrong and right all at once. The wind hit him from the left, carrying the child's scent toward him in a thin, fragile ribbon, and that was when everything stopped. He inhaled. And the world tilted, not violently, not dramatically, but with a slow, bone-deep recognition that seeped into him like warm blood on cold marble. His wolf surged so suddenly that his fingers twitched, nails sharpening before he forced them back, breath catching in a way he didn't allow even in battle, because what he smelled, what drifted toward him from that trembling toddler, was familiar, not merely reminiscent, not similar. Familiar in the oldest, most primitive way a wolf knew, a scent that lived inside him somewhere buried, dormant, impossible, but undeniably true. His heartbeat, usually steady as a war drum, skipped once. He stepped closer, boots sinking into soft mud thawed by the child's lingering warmth. The toddler looked up at him, and through the shimmering tears, a pair of eyes, round, confused, hurting, reflected the moonlight like fragments of something forgotten. No words came from the child, only a soft, choking sob, and the Alpha, who commanded armies without blinking, who held back rival packs with nothing more than a cold glare, felt the air punch out of his lungs. He knew that scent. He shouldn't know it. He couldn't know it. But he did. It threaded through the cold night, finding fragments of memory he thought he had sealed long ago, tightening something behind his ribs until the silence around him vibrated with an emotion he refused to name. He had never had a child, never allowed anyone close enough after the war that had left him colder, rougher, a shadow of the man he once was. But the scent spoke of blood, of kin, of something impossibly intimate, something that should have been impossible to deny. He crouched slowly, letting the movement carry the weight of a predator approaching something fragile. His cape slid off his shoulders, pooling onto the frost like spilled ink. The toddler flinched at first, shoulders curling inward, but didn't move away. Instead, the child cried harder, as if something in him recognized the presence too, or simply understood that someone, finally, had come. The Alpha extended a hand, gloved and steady, his voice a low vibration, barely breaking the silence. "Who left you here?" The question came out softer than expected, almost a whisper, heavy with the tension he refused to show. The child couldn't answer, of course. Too young, too frightened, too cold, but the small fingers reached for him anyway, weak and trembling. The alpha's throat tightened. The scent hit him again, clearer now, unhindered by distance. Faintly sweet, threaded with something wild, something unmistakably tied to him. His wolf pushed hard against his control, wanting to pick the child up, curl around them, guard them with teeth and blood. He forced himself to breathe slowly, deeply, but each breath only confirmed the truth he didn't want to acknowledge. This child was not random, not abandoned by chance, not placed here accidentally. Someone had brought this toddler to his border, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He leaned in closer, eyes scanning the blanket, the earth, the footprints around them, small ones, belonging only to the child. No adult tracks, no sense of strangers, no broken branches. Whoever left the toddler had been careful, too careful. Either a witch, masking their trail, or someone with a wolf's sense of terrain. The alpha's jaw clenched. Fury simmered beneath the shock, ice meeting fire in the center of his chest. Leaving a child, this child, alone on a border where rogues prowled, where magic seeped through the soil, where anyone could find them first. It was calculated cruelty, but still, beneath the anger, that other feeling pulsed quietly, insistent and ancient, recognition. The toddler lifted trembling arms in a silent plea to be held. He hesitated, only for a breath, only because touching the child made the truth too real, too fast. But then he saw the little mouth quivering, the breath frosting weakly in the cold air, the tiny fingers stained with dirt and fear. And the alpha, whose hands had broken enemies, held dying warriors, carried the weight of a kingdom, found himself reaching out with a gentleness he didn't know he still possessed. He lifted the toddler into his arms. The child curled instantly against his chest, small face pressing into the fabric of his coat, body trembling with soft, exhausted hiccups. And just like that, the scent enveloped him fully, unmistakably, undeniably, overwhelmingly his. Something inside him cracked open, slow and irreversible, like a frozen lake thawing under a hidden sun. The warmth of the child seeped through his clothes. The tiny heartbeat fluttered against him with fragile insistence. And the alpha, standing at the very edge of his territory with the moon painting him in cold silver, felt the ground shift beneath the weight of what this meant. He looked down at the toddler, studying every detail, the soft curl of hair damp from tears, the delicate eyelashes casting faint shadows, the imprint of fear still trembling in the small body pressed to him. And then his gaze darkened, slow and dangerous, as the truth settled into the marrow of who he was. This child smelled like him, like blood shared, like destiny he didn't choose but now could not refuse. He exhaled once, the sound heavy, ancient, resonant. Then, with the toddler held securely against his chest, he turned toward the heart of the Packlands, stepping across the border with the weight of a revelation that would change everything. His life, his throne, his past, his future. The night watched him move, the fog parting around him like a bow. And as he carried the child deeper into his world, the familiar scent lingered, whispering the truth he had never expected to face. The toddler was his. The forest thickened around him as he carried the toddler deeper into Pack territory, each step sinking into the damp winter soil that yielded beneath his boots with a hushed, reluctant softness. Moonlight fractured through the tree canopy, breaking into pale shards that trembled against his shoulders, illuminating the trembling little body curled against his chest. Cold wind followed him like a persistent whisper, brushing the edges of his coat, pulling at the stray strands of his dark hair as if trying to draw him back toward the border he had just crossed. But he kept walking, the weight of the child grounding him more than any command, any duty, any oath he had sworn under the ancient stone hall of his ancestors. The deeper he went, the more the world changed. The air warmed subtly, infused with the faint scent of pine resin, damp moss, and the lingering trace of smoke from the village hearths further ahead. Yet no matter how much the environment shifted, his heart remained locked in the cold shock of what he had found. He felt it beating in the toddler's tiny chest, fast, fragile, frightened, and each small vibration sank into him like a quiet plea he couldn't ignore. The child was exhausted, breath soft and uneven, face hidden in his coat as if trying to disappear inside him. The alpha adjusted his grip without thinking, hand cradling the back of the toddler's head with a gentleness that contradicted the tension burning under his skin. Branches creaked overhead. Frost crackled underfoot. But inside him, beneath muscle and discipline and years of hardened rule, something far more chaotic stirred, a memory he couldn't fully grasp yet, something blurred by time, night, and choices he had buried deep enough to forget. The scent still clung to him, unmistakable and unnerving, threading through the air with every exhale the child released. He inhaled again, slower this time, the cold biting the inside of his lungs, as if warning him not to feel what he was beginning to feel. But the recognition was there, undeniable, ancient, thrumming through the space between them like a pulse shared by force of nature. Something in him whispered that this child wasn't merely connected to him. The connection ran deeper, threaded through bone and instinct, blood and destiny, something that transcended logic or time. As the path widened, the alpha slowed, his senses sharpening in every direction. The forest was unusually quiet, too quiet for a night when the hunters usually roamed the shadowed ridge. No distant howls, no rustling of wolves running through underbrush, no laughter from the guard posts, only silence, thick and unsettling. His wolf bristled beneath his skin, not out of fear, but out of instinctive protectiveness. With each step, he felt the weight of the toddler shift slightly, small hands clutching the fabric of his coat in a grip that was both fragile and desperate. The child's soft, warm breath soaked into his chest, leaving a faint trail of heat that grounded him with a force he didn't expect. He had carried wounded warriors out of battle, held dying comrades as they whispered their last words, lifted countless burdens that came with rule and war and the unending balance between justice and violence. But carrying this child felt different. It felt dangerous in a way he couldn't articulate, not because the toddler posed a threat, but because of what the toddler represented, because of the past he had sealed shut, because of the future that suddenly felt uncertain. The forest opened into a narrow clearing where an old well stood crookedly, stones covered in emerald moss and cracks running like faded scars across its sides. He stopped for a moment, listening. The wind stilled. The toddler shifted in his arms, letting out a soft whimper that pierced him with a sensation he wasn't prepared for. Protectiveness, fierce and primal, rising like wildfire in his gut. He adjusted his stance, pulling the child closer. "It's all right," he murmured, voice low, steady, almost unrecognizable to himself. "You're safe now." The words tasted unfamiliar, a vow formed instinctively rather than rationally, but the toddler responded as if understanding, small fingers loosening slightly, body relaxing against him. The alpha's eyes scanned the ground, taking in every detail, the leaves pressed unnaturally flat where footsteps once could have been, the faint trace of something magical lingering in the air like a faded aftertaste. Someone had masked their tracks well, too well, and whoever it was had crossed into his territory. That alone was enough to stoke fury beneath his ribs. But leaving his toddler behind, in the dead of night, at the edge of Wolfland, knowing the dangers, was something else entirely. His jaw tightened, teeth pressing together until the muscle along his cheek twitched. The pack elders would demand explanations. The warriors would question the scent. The entire hierarchy of his land would tremble with the implications of this child's existence. But that wasn't what unsettled him the most. What unsettled him was the quiet flood of emotion he couldn't name, something that slipped past his defenses with the softness of winter light and the inevitability of fate. He looked down at the child again. Moonlight brushed the toddler's cheek, revealing faint smudges of dirt, dried tears, and a small bruise forming beneath the lower lip. His wolf growled softly at the sight, not outwardly, not audibly, but deep inside, a low vibration of anger at anyone who had frightened or harmed this little creature. The clearing felt colder suddenly. The alpha drew a slow breath, letting it settle into his chest before exhaling with control. He needed answers, but answers could come later. Safety came first. He stepped out of the clearing, following a narrow trail that wound through whispering pines and led toward the dim lights of the pack village. The first torches flickered in the distance, dancing like small flames battling the rising mist. Their glow cast long shadows that bent and swayed, distorting the forms of buildings and fences into elongated silhouettes that seemed half awake, half breathing. The toddler stirred again, soft fingers brushing the fabric near his collar. The touch was barely a whisper, yet it sent another ripple of recognition through him. He didn't understand how or why, but he understood one undeniable truth. This child was part of him, flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood, something he didn't know he lost, or something that had been hidden from him for reasons he wasn't ready to face. He reached the edge of the village, where wooden homes lined in curved half-circles created a protective ring around the Alpha's hall. Lanterns glowed warmly in windows, flickering with the movements of pack members settling into their nightly routines. But as he approached, his presence was sensed before he stepped into the torchlight. Wolves didn't need eyes to know when their Alpha was near. A few guards emerged from the shadows, their postures stiffening the moment they caught sight of him. Their eyes widened, not in fear, but in confusion, in shock, in silent questions that froze in their throats when they saw what he carried. He didn't slow down, didn't offer explanation, didn't acknowledge their hesitation. His stride remained calm, commanding, unwavering, but the guards instinctively parted for him, allowing the Alpha to pass through without a single word exchanged. Their gazes lingered on the child with a mixture of awe and fear. He felt it behind him, the way their breaths caught, the way their instincts reacted to the scent he carried. A blood scent. His scent. Something that should not exist. He walked past them as if the world around him were shifting into a new shape he hadn't yet accepted. The toddler whimpered again, softer now, more tired than scared, and the Alpha brushed a thumb gently along the child's back, a slow motion that felt strangely natural despite the storm raging inside him. He crossed the central path that led to the main hall, a towering structure of carved stone and dark wood, its entrance guarded by two massive pillars etched with ancient runes. The hall's firelight pulsed through the slatted windows, warm and golden, painting the night with a glow that contrasted sharply with the cold weight in his chest. He paused for a moment at the foot of the steps, the wind sweeping past him in a cold rush, lifting the edge of his coat. The toddler clung to him with soft, instinctive trust. He no longer questioned whether the child belonged to him. Every breath he took confirmed it. Every instinct screamed it. Every shift of the toddler's small body against his chest solidified it. The only question now was how and why. He ascended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat against the stone. The hall fell silent as soon as he entered, flames flickering high in the air as though drawn to his presence. Warriors, servants, and elders turned to look at him, conversations dying mid-sentence, breath stalling, eyes widening. He ignored them all. Their shock meant nothing compared to the child's soft, shivering breaths against his chest. The hall felt smaller tonight, tighter, the walls closer than usual, heavy with expectation and dread. Shadows clung to the corners like watchers waiting to judge. The Alpha moved through the space with quiet authority, heading toward the private chambers deeper within the hall. But even as he walked, he could feel every stare piercing his back, every whispered question hanging unspoken. He felt none of it. He felt only the child, the warm, fragile weight holding on to him, the scent that bound them, the recognition that had shaken him to his core. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath years of solitude, discipline, and unyielding rulership, something ancient whispered one truth like a prophecy awakening. This child had not been abandoned at his border by accident. This child had been delivered, to him, for him, because the past he tried to bury was coming back, and destiny had just placed it in his arms. The door to his private chambers closed behind him with a soft, decisive thud that seemed to seal the rest of the world on the other side. The sudden hush that followed was almost unnerving. The murmur of the hall, the crackle of great fires, the subtle scraping of chairs and armor, all of it faded into a muted echo, leaving only the quieter, more intimate sounds of this room. The dull sigh of embers in the hearth, the faint rattle of the window under the pressure of the wind, and the small, uneven breaths of the toddler pressed against his chest. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply stood near the door, muscles coiled beneath his coat, holding the child as though the slightest shift might break whatever fragile thread bound them together. The room was large, carved directly into the stone heart of the hall, lined with shelves of old tomes and weapons long retired from battle. Heavy furs were thrown over a low bed, their dark pelts catching the glow of the fire and reflecting it back in warm, reddish tones that softened the otherwise stark angles of the stone walls. A thick rug muted his steps as he finally crossed the threshold, boots sinking into woven patterns that told the stories of his lineage, symbols of wolves and moons, and bloodlines that had never been broken. Until now, he had always believed himself the last of his direct line. Now, with the toddler's weight in his arms and that scent, his scent, filling the room, that belief felt like a lie he'd been living without knowing. He moved closer to the fire, careful not to jostle the child more than necessary. The flickering light painted his face in warm gold and deep shadow, highlighting the sharp cut of his cheekbones, the controlled set of his jaw, the restrained intensity in his eyes. He had the kind of presence that altered a room just by existing in it. The air seemed to tighten. The shadows seemed to watch him, and even silence itself felt like it had to answer to him. Tonight, however, that presence wrapped itself around something small and fragile. He knelt slowly, letting one knee sink into the rug as he shifted the toddler in his arms. The child made a soft sound, a whimper half swallowed by exhaustion, small fingers clutching at his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Gently, he laid the toddler down on the bed, not among the arranged pillows, but right on the thickest part of the furs, where warmth lingered and the softness seemed almost alive. The toddler resisted at first, fingers tightening, eyes blinking open with new panic, but he kept one of the child's hands wrapped loosely in his, anchoring more firmly with that simple touch than any spoken promise could. "Easy," he murmured, the low rumble of his voice almost indistinguishable from the crackle of the fire. "You're staying here." It wasn't a question. It was a decision, a decree. As Alpha, his words had the weight of law, but here, now, they were something else as well. A vow whispered into the flickering light, binding him to this unexpected, unfamiliar little soul. The toddler's breathing steadied, slowly, in hesitant increments. Those small fingers, still wrapped around his larger hand, twitched, as if testing whether he would remain. He did. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer onto the edge of the bed, coat falling open to reveal the dark, simple shirt beneath, sleeves pushed back slightly as the heat from the fire began to sink into his skin. The scent of smoke and embers wrapped around them, mixing with the child's scent until the two became something new and strangely right. His gaze dropped to the blanket the toddler had been wrapped in, a worn, threadbare fabric now half clinging to the small body, half sprawled over the furs. Slowly, with a controlled, almost reverent motion, he lifted it, bringing it closer to his face. He let the fabric brush his fingers, his knuckles, his cheek. His wolf stirred, nostrils flaring, senses sharpening. Beneath the lingering cold and fear, beneath the faint dampness of the night, there was something else. Another scent. Another familiarity. A ghost from his past. He inhaled, and his spine locked, breath catching so sharply it almost hurt. It was faint, buried under the child's overpowering presence, but it was there like a whisper breathed into his ear across years. Wildflowers crushed under boot, the sharpness of rain on stone, the slightest trace of something sweet and stubborn, something that once lingered on his skin. After nights he refused to remember fully. Her. The blanket still carried traces of her. His fingers tightened around the fabric, veins standing out against the back of his hand as his knuckles whitened. He hadn't thought of her in years. Not consciously, not in a way that allowed her face to fully form in his mind. He had buried the memory like a wound that never quite healed, covering it in duty and steel and the cold distance of leadership. A choice made under the weight of war and prophecy. The kind that carved scars not just into flesh, but into destiny. Yet here she was, her existence echoing in the fibers of this blanket, wrapped around a child who smelled like him. The room seemed to narrow around him, the firelight dimming at the edges of his vision. His wolf lashed out inside him, not in rage, but in a fierce, possessive surge of emotion he didn't have a name for. He forced himself to breathe, to release the blanket slowly instead of tearing it apart. The toddler shifted again, small body instinctively seeking warmth. Without thinking, he moved his hand to the child's back, palm spanning most of it, feeling the fragile rise and fall of the tiny ribcage beneath his touch. The contact steadied him more than any calming technique he had ever learned in battle. This was real. This was not a dream, or a vision, or a trick. This was a living, breathing piece of his bloodline lying on his bed. A soft knock on the door broke the thick quiet. It wasn't loud. It wouldn't dare be, but he felt it like a crack in the strange cocoon that had formed around him and the child. His eyes flicked toward the door, the calm, cold Alpha returning to his features, like a familiar mask sliding back into place. "Enter," he said, voice smooth again, controlled. The door opened slowly, and one of the healers stepped inside, a woman with streaks of white through her dark hair, eyes sharp and observant even as she kept them respectfully lowered. She carried a small basket of herbs, bandages, and warm cloths. The Alpha had not called for her in words, but his guards knew him well enough. Anything brought into the hall in his arms at this hour, with that scent and that expression, would be seen by a healer before the moon crossed its zenith. She paused when she saw the toddler, surprise flickering across her features, before she schooled them into neutrality. "My Alpha," she murmured softly, bowing her head. "I came to—" Her gaze flicked briefly to the child, then to his hand resting on the small back, and finally to his face. She inhaled, just a little, enough for her wolf to catch the scent that filled the room. Her pupils dilated, the faint color in her cheeks drained. She didn't move any closer. He watched the understanding dawn in her eyes. She didn't voice it. She didn't dare, but he saw it anyway. The shock, the awe, the unspoken question. "You have an heir." He gave a slight tilt of his head, a subtle, unquestionable command. "Say nothing." Her lips pressed into a line of obedience. She approached the bed slowly, steps quiet, careful not to startle the child. He felt the toddler tense under his hand, small fingers clutching again at his shirt, and he shifted slightly, letting his presence bracket the healer's approach like a protective wall. She noticed. She moved even more gently, hands visible, voice low and soothing. "I will not hurt the little one," she said, not to him, but almost as if to the child, yet also to the wolf watching her, only to clean and warm. The toddler's head turned slightly, eyes half open, glazed with sleep and confusion. The Alpha's thumb moved absent-mindedly in slow, steady circles on the small back. The healer knelt at the other side of the bed, dipping a cloth in a bowl of warm water she had brought, wringing it out with practiced ease. She cleaned the toddler's dirt-smudged cheeks, careful, precise, respectful. Every now and then, she glanced at the Alpha, measuring his silence, his posture, his refusal to move away from the child even an inch. "There are no visible wounds," she said finally, voice still hushed. "Bruises, some scrapes, signs of cold, but whoever left the child did not beat or break the body." Her words were meant to inform, but they also carried a shadow of accusation toward whoever had abandoned the toddler. His jaw tightened again, but he only nodded. "Leave what you brought," he said, voice calm but absolute. "No one else is to enter this room unless I call for them." The healer hesitated for half a heartbeat, then bowed her head. "As you command, my Alpha." Her gaze flicked once more to the child, to him, to the invisible bond that now filled the room like a new gravity pulling everything around it. Then she withdrew, closing the door quietly behind her. The silence returned. The fire popped softly, sending a thin stream of sparks up the chimney. The wind outside pressed against the stone, unable to breach the thick walls. Inside, the air was warm and heavy, with scents that now felt impossibly intertwined. Smoke, fur, herbs, and that unmistakable echo of himself now wrapped in the smaller, softer presence of the child. He shifted closer still, letting his weight sink more fully onto the edge of the bed. For the first time in years, he removed his gloves, fingers flexing against the warmth of the air. His bare hand settled on the toddler's back again, skin to fabric to skin, a direct connection that sent another ripple of recognition through him. The toddler's small fingers, as if sensing the change, released their grip on his shirt, and instead found his wrist, curling around it weakly. His heart, the heart of an Alpha king feared across borders and whispered about in rival courts, gave a slow, heavy thud that felt too loud in the quiet room. He stared at that tiny hand around his wrist, so fragile it nearly broke him just to look at it. His wolf pressed forward, no longer violent, no longer restless, just watchful, protective, claiming, not territory, not pack, not power, but something far more vulnerable. He leaned forward slightly, enough for his breath to brush gently over the toddler's hair. The scent hit him again, familiar and final. There was no denying it now, not even to himself, not even if he tried to hide behind logic or fear or the old scars of choices made. This child was his. Flesh, blood, bone. A continuation of a line that should have ended with him the day he chose war over love, duty over heart. And yet, destiny was not something that bowed to his decisions. Destiny had a way of bending back, circling, finding its own path. Tonight, it had found him in the form of a crying toddler left at his border. His gaze hardened slightly, the tenderness in his touch balanced by the steel in his eyes. Whoever had done this, whoever had laid this child at the edge of his land, had forced open a door he had kept locked for years. They had provoked him in the most intimate way possible, not by threatening his throne, but by delivering him something he could not ignore, could not reject, could not send away. As the toddler's breathing finally evened out into deeper, heavier sleep, his hand remained exactly where it was, anchored on that small back. He sat in unmoving vigilance, a silent guardian carved in shadow and firelight, the full force of his presence focused on one tiny, sleeping figure. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their voices rising to the swollen moon in restless, echoing waves. Inside, the Alpha did not join them. He stayed where he was, watching, remembering, possessed by a truth that had slid into his life on small, unsteady feet. The child was part of him, and now, whether he had chosen it or not, he belonged to the child as well. The fire had burned low, reduced to a deep amber glow that pulsed softly beneath the weight of darkness. But the Alpha had not once looked away from the sleeping toddler. Hours might have passed, or minutes. Time had thinned into something shapeless, narrowing down to the steady rise and fall of the small body pressed into the furs beside him. The child slept with the trust of someone too exhausted to protect themselves, breath warm and faint, cheek flushed with the warmth of the room instead of the fear of the night outside. And he, Alpha, ruler, warrior, creature of instinct and iron, watched as if trying to memorize each fragile detail, as if knowledge alone could shield the toddler from the unanswered questions pressing against the edges of his consciousness. But those questions refused to stay silent. The lingering scent on the blanket, the undeniable recognition in the child's scent. The old memory rising like smoke he thought the wind had long extinguished. He leaned back slightly, letting his gaze drift to the far wall where runes carved into ancient stone glowed faintly, reacting to the presence of something powerful. Not magic, at least not entirely. Something older, something tied to bloodlines and oaths, and the kind of history the pack avoided speaking aloud. His wolf stirred under his skin, restless now, pacing the invisible lines of memory that he had spent years keeping sealed. He reached for the blanket again, fingers running over the worn fabric as if tracing a map written in threads instead of ink. And there, beneath soot, cold, soil, he felt it again. That second scent, faint, but real as breath, as real as wound, as real as memory. Her, the one he had lost, the one he had let go, the only woman whose name he never spoke, not even in rage, not even in longing. His fingers froze on the cloth. A soft sound broke the stillness, not from the child, but from the door. Not a knock, not a whisper, more like a shift in the air, a disturbance subtle enough that only a wolf of his rank would notice. Someone stood outside, listening, waiting, breathing emotions they didn't dare utter. "Enter," he commanded quietly. The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of cold corridor air into the warmth of the room. It was not a servant this time, not a healer, but the beta, the only one who could enter his chambers without fear of losing his life for crossing a line. A tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes that missed nothing, and loyalty that weighed heavier than armor. His presence filled the doorway like a shadow with purpose. "My Alpha," the beta said, voice low, controlled. But beneath that control there was concern, confusion, and something sharper, fear. Not fear for himself, fear for the pack, fear of what this child meant. The Alpha didn't move, didn't shift his hand from the toddler's back. He simply waited. The beta approached slowly, respecting the invisible tension that saturated the air between them. His gaze fell to the child, and something in his expression flickered. Shock, yes, but also recognition. Not the kind that came from scent alone. Recognition of the impossible. "He smells like you," the beta murmured. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an observation. It was a truth, handed over like a blade. The alpha's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The beta breathed in slowly, deeply, confirming what he already knew. And you smelled someone else, he added after a long moment, softer now, as though the words themselves were sacred and dangerous. Someone I thought we'd never speak of again. The alpha's gaze darkened like a storm rolling silently over mountains. The beta swallowed, lowering his voice even more. Her. The room tightened, the shadows stretching as if recoiling from the name not spoken. The alpha shifted his hand on the toddler's back, not in aggression, but in a silent acknowledgement of truth. The beta understood. Perfectly. Painfully. Silence settled once more. Thick. Heavy. Full. She would never abandon a child. The beta continued quietly, stepping closer until he was almost at the foot of the bed. Not hers, not yours, not anyone's. The alpha's breath came out slow, deep, dragged from a place he didn't want to revisit. Memories that he had locked away began pushing through, the sharp scent of rain-soaked stones, laughter carried through mountain winds, the warmth of a touch he had forced himself to forget because remembering had become too costly. No, he said, finally breaking the silence. She would not. His voice was soft, but his certainty rang like a blade unsheathed in the darkness. The beta bowed his head, letting the truth settle. Then someone took the child from her, he said, voice rough with something that hovered between anger and old grief. Or someone forced her hand. The alpha's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the fire reflected something cold in them. Vengeance coiling like a sleeping serpent awakening beneath his ribs. Or she is dead, the alpha murmured. The words sliced the air open. The beta flinched, not visibly, but internally, his breath stuttering just enough that a wolf would hear it. He didn't argue. He didn't soften the possibility. He simply stood there, spine straight, accepting the weight of the truth that neither of them wanted to face. A long silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the toddler's breathing. Then quietly the beta asked, "Do you think the child knows?" The alpha looked down at the toddler, soft hair falling over the forehead, small fingers curled around his own wrist. Fear and sleep had stolen any expression from the tiny face, leaving only innocence, trust, and a haunting familiarity. "No," the alpha said softly. "He's too young." But was he? Wolves were born with instincts humans could never understand. Bloodline memories sometimes whispered even before speech existed. A bond between father and child, alpha and heir, could be felt long before it could be explained. The beta stepped back, watching the tender scene with an expression equal parts reverence and dread. "You will tell the elders?" he asked hesitantly. No. The answer was immediate, sharp, absolute. The beta didn't question it. He rarely questioned anything the alpha decided. "This stays between us," the alpha added, "until I understand what happened, until I know where she is, dead or alive." The beta nodded slowly, the weight of the promise anchoring him in place. "What do you need me to do?" "Find who crossed our borders tonight. Any magic, any trace, any whisper. I want answers. And if this was a message?" The alpha's gaze turned to ice. "Then I will answer it." The beta bowed deeply. "As you command." He withdrew from the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet, respectful click. And once again, the alpha was alone. He turned back to the child, letting the silence settle around them again. The toddler shifted in sleep, letting out a soft, plaintive sound that pulled at something inside him more fiercely than any battle cry ever had. He brushed a strand of hair away from the small forehead, fingers gentle, almost reverent. As he moved the hair, something caught his eye, a mark, faint, pale, nearly invisible unless one looked closely. It rested just above the toddler's ear, a small crescent shape, like a sliver of moon pressed into the skin. His breath froze. The room seemed to tilt. He lifted the child slightly, adjusting the angle to see it better. The firelight caught the mark fully now, illuminating it with a glow that looked almost like reflected silver. A lunar mark, a bloodline mark, a mark that only appeared in heirs of his lineage, children born under rare celestial convergences, destined for power, few wolves ever touched. His throat tightened, breath deepening, eyes locked on the crescent moon etched into soft skin. This wasn't just his child. This was an heir marked by prophecy, a continuation of his bloodline in the oldest, most sacred form. a child who should not exist, a child whose birth would have shaken the very foundation of their world. His fingers trembled for the first time in years. He closed his eyes, battling the storm rising inside him, the shock, the grief, the rage, the unbearable pull of recognition. When he opened them again, everything felt sharper, clearer, more frightening. The child wasn't abandoned. The child was hidden, protected, delivered. He leaned closer, forehead almost touching the toddler's, voice barely more than a breath. "Who took you from her?" he whispered. "And why did they bring you to me?" The child didn't answer. Couldn't answer, but the small body curled instinctively toward him, moonmark glowing faintly in the firelight, as if destiny itself were reaching for him. He gathered the toddler gently into his arms again, holding the small body close, feeling the bond settling deeper, no longer a whisper, but a pulse. His air, his blood, his forgotten future, and somewhere out there, the woman he had lost, either alive and in danger, or dead and betrayed. He closed his eyes once more, letting the scent of the child seep into him like truth. The revelation was complete. The world had changed, and nothing, not prophecy, not war, not death itself, would keep him from the truth now. Not when his child bore the moon of his bloodline, not when fate had delivered the past into his arms, not when someone had dared to take her and leave him with the proof. The night deepened slowly, like ink seeping into water, thickening the shadows along the stone walls, and pulling the world into a hush that felt too still, too expectant, too aware of what lay in the Alpha's chambers. The toddler slept again, small body curled into his arms, cheek resting against his chest as though it had always belonged there, as though fate itself had shaped them for this moment. The Alpha remained seated on the edge of the bed, barely breathing, barely blinking, locked in a stillness that resembled carved obsidian more than flesh. But inside him, the storm had already begun to break. The moonmark changed everything. Its pale glow still clung to the child's skin in the memory of firelight, etched into his mind with the finality of truth carved in bone. The toddler wasn't only his blood. He was chosen, destined, marked by the moon itself, a rare, sacred lineage that only emerged when the gods, or the old magic, intervened. A legacy he had never expected to continue. Something that should have been celebrated with ceremony, with prayer, with war drums and moon chants. Something that should have been his proudest moment as king. Instead, his heir had been left alone at the edge of his land, cold, crying, trembling, as if the fates were mocking him, as if someone believed he didn't deserve to know. The child stirred faintly, small fingers curling into the fabric of his coat, tiny body fitting itself into the contour of his chest with instinctive trust. That simple movement, so fragile, so helpless, ignited something inside him that felt ancient and violent. Protection surged through him like a blade drawn in rage, carving away doubt, hesitation, fear. He gathered the toddler closer, letting his chin brush the soft crown of the child's head, in a gesture so natural it almost frightened him. He had been ready to let his bloodline die with him. He had been ready to rule alone, fight alone, die alone. He had been ready to bury his past until it suffocated under its own weight. But the moon had other plans. Someone had interfered. Someone had stolen his child's birthright, hidden an heir, risked their life to keep the toddler alive long enough to reach him, or risked the toddler's life to send a message that only he would understand. And beneath his ribs, something sharp twisted, anger, fear, memory, grief, a cocktail he hadn't tasted in years. He lifted his gaze to the window where the moon hung full and swollen, its cold silver glow spilling across the stone like liquid frost. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries low and restless, uncertain, unsettled. They could feel the shift in the air. Wolves always did. Something massive had changed in their world tonight, and though none of them knew what it was yet, instinct told them to brace themselves. The Alpha rose slowly to his feet, the toddler cradled securely in one arm. His movements were silent, fluid, predatory, as though the shadows themselves stepped aside to make room for him. He carried the child to a low wooden cradle tucked into the far corner of the room, a relic from generations past, carved with the sigils of his lineage. He had never used it, never even allowed it to be brought near him after the war. Yet it had remained here, untouched, quietly waiting, as though it knew this night would come. He laid the toddler inside, careful to arrange the furs so the warmth held tightly, wrapping the child as though the world outside would shatter the moment the cold touched him. For a brief moment, the toddler whimpered, hand reaching blindly, searching for the alpha's presence even in sleep. He placed his hand over that small one. It stilled. The alpha exhaled slowly, forcing the tension in his spine to settle before he finally straightened again. But his senses were alert now, sharpened by fear and fury, scanning the room, the hall beyond it, the world outside, as though danger might seep through the stone itself. He didn't move far. He couldn't bear to. Instead, he stood near the cradle, arms crossed over his chest, breath steadying into a slow, simmering rhythm that matched the storm brewing beneath his skin. Fragments of memory drifted in like embers carried by the wind, her laughter in the mountains, her scent in the rain, her hand gripping his, the last night before he lost her, the promise she had whispered, the one he failed to keep. He shut his eyes, jaw tightening, the memories pressing deeper, sharper. She hadn't simply disappeared. Someone had taken her. Someone had hidden her. Someone had kept her alive long enough for this child to be born, or kept her captive until she could no longer fight. He swallowed hard, the rage settling deeper, colder, more controlled. Someone would pay. Someone would kneel. Someone would bleed for what had been done. He paced the room like a caged storm, fingers twitching as though itching for a sword, claws threatening to slip through his skin. His wolf prowled just beneath the surface, the air around him vibrating with its presence. His beta would find answers. The elders would be lied to until the truth was ready to strike like lightning. The borders would be secured, the hunters sent out, the witches questioned, the seers summoned. This was no longer about politics or peace or power. This was personal. This was blood. He returned to the cradle, unable to stay away, drawn back by the soft glow of the child's mark and the whisper of breath in sleep. He crouched low, his face illuminated by the faint moonlight spilling in from the window. The toddler's tiny chest rose and fell, rhythm steady, so vulnerable it made something inside him ache. If she was alive, she had suffered. If she was dead, she had died alone. And either truth was enough to rip him open. He brushed a knuckle lightly along the toddler's cheek. The child leaned into the touch unconsciously, lips parting in a soft sigh, the alpha's throat constricted. He bowed his head, forehead nearly brushing the edge of the wooden cradle, breath falling warm against the furs. "I will not fail you," he murmured, voice barely audible. Stripped of the cold power he showed the world. Not like I failed her. The vow settled into the air like smoke, wrapping around the walls, the cradle, the child himself, binding itself to fate. A shift in the hall outside snapped his head up. Footsteps. Fast. Urgent. Only one person would dare run toward the alpha's chamber. The door burst open, only halfway, because even in panic the guards wouldn't let it fly. And the beta appeared again, breathing hard, eyes sharp, face pale. "My alpha," he began, but stopped when he saw the child asleep, safe in the cradle, moonmark faintly glowing under the firelight's dying embers. His expression tightened. "We found something." The alpha stood in a single fluid motion, muscles coiling. "What?" the beta swallowed. "At the border, where the child was left." Silence thickened, pressing against the walls. The beta stepped forward, extending his hand. In his palm lay a small, torn fragment of fabric, black, charred along one edge, embroidered with a symbol so old, no ordinary wolf would have recognized it, but the alpha did. He felt the blood drain from his face, shock punching through him with the force of a blade. The symbol, a crescent woven into a broken chain, a mark of the forbidden order, a mark of the exiled wolves, a mark of the ones who had taken her. His wolf lunged inside him, a violent surge of instinctive fury that shook his lungs, his bones, the entire room. He gripped the edge of the cradle to stop himself from shifting right then, right there, driven by a rage he had not tasted since the war. The beta lowered his head. They crossed the border tonight. The alpha stared at the fragment of fabric, breath burning, vision darkening. "They have your heir," the beta whispered, "and they wanted you to know." The alpha lifted his gaze slowly, deadly calm returning to him with terrifying precision. Not fear, not panic, but the cold fire of an alpha king awakening. He stepped toward the door, voice quiet, but carrying the weight of mountains. "Prepare the warriors, the trackers, the witches." The beta bowed. "And you?" The alpha turned his head toward the cradle, gaze softening for only a heartbeat. "Someone tried to hide my bloodline." His voice dropped, low and lethal. "And I will burn their world down to find out why." He looked at the moon mark one last time before stepping into the hall, where destiny, danger, and the truth waited like wolves with bared teeth. The war for his child had begun. The hall responded to his command like a living creature jolted awake, its stone veins humming with sudden purpose as messengers ran in silent urgency, shadow to shadow, door to door. Torches flared higher in their sconces, embers stirred as if some invisible wind had swept through the fortress, and beneath it, all the old magic that threaded through the foundations of the pack's stronghold began to vibrate, subtle and restless. The alpha walked through it all as if through a storm he had summoned himself, coat trailing in a dark wave behind him, shoulders squared, gaze unyielding. Yet every step he took away from his chambers felt like it tugged at something inside his chest, like an invisible thread binding him to the sleeping child he had left in the cradle. His heir, his blood, his reason. The courtyard beyond the great doors opened beneath a swollen sky, clouds drifting like slow ghosts across the face of the moon. Torches burned along the stone walls, casting wavering halos over the gathered wolves, warriors with eyes of gold, silver, storm gray, all watching him with a mixture of fear and fierce devotion. They could sense it now, the shift, the change, the way the air tasted different, the way their alpha moved like a blade finally unsheathed after too long in its scabbard. Armor clinked softly, leather creaked, steel glinted. The scent of tension threaded through the night like smoke. His beta stood near the front of the assembled warriors, posture rigid, eyes trained only on him. Behind him, hunters and trackers waited, their wolves stirring just beneath their skin. The witch's envoy, cloaked in deep moss green, lingered near the back, like a shadow unwilling to fully commit to the light. The alpha descended the steps at a measured pace, every line of his body radiating control rather than haste. He would not show desperation. He would not show fear. An alpha's rage was a weapon, not a wound, and tonight he would wield it with precision. "We are not at war," he said, voice low and resonant, the kind of tone that made the air itself seem to pause. "Not yet." The last two words cut through the courtyard like a promise. A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves, quickly stifled. "But our borders have been crossed," he continued. "Our oaths have been spat on, and something that belongs to us has been taken, hidden, and used as a message." He didn't say, "my child," didn't say, "my heir." Not out here, not yet. But his power rolled over the crowd like thunder, and instinct told them the truth anyway. They shifted subtly closer, pack instinct circling around something they did not yet see but could already feel. "The exiled order walks again," he said, lifting the torn fragment of fabric so the closest warriors could see the faint symbol. "They want us to know they were here, that they still move unseen, that they still have teeth." His lips curled into the ghost of a humorless smile. "They forgot one thing," he finished softly. "We bite harder." A growl rose through the wolves, not chaotic, not wild, but unified, like a chord struck from many throats at once. The night held it, carried it, sent it out into the forest where it echoed through the trees like a warning. He let it crest, then lifted a hand. Silence fell. "The hunters will track their scent," he said. "The witches will search their paths in ways eyes cannot. The elders will be told only what is necessary to keep them calm and our enemies blind. No one beyond this circle speaks of what happened tonight. Is that understood?" A chorus of voices answered as one. "Yes, Alpha." His gaze swept the crowd, lingering on each face long enough for them to feel weighed, measured, bound to his will. "This is not a reckless war," he said. "This is a precise hunt. We are not charging into darkness. We are dragging what hides there into our light." He lowered his hand, letting the fragment of fabric curl between his fingers. The symbol seemed to burn against his skin. "Go," he commanded. "Prepare. We move before dawn." The crowd dispersed with purpose, shifting into small knots of strategy and assignments, some slipping into the dark to wake their wolves fully, some heading toward the armory, some toward the lower towers where the seers kept their incense and water bowls and maps of stars. The courtyard began to empty, the tension redirecting itself into motion. The beta remained behind. "You're sure you don't want the Elder's blessing for this?" the beta asked quietly, when they were alone beneath the open sky. The Alpha looked up at the moon, heavy and bright, painting his features with ghostly silver. "Blessings have done little to stop them before," he said. "I won't waste time asking permission to protect what is mine." The beta nodded once, acceptance and loyalty settling back over his features like a familiar cloak. "I'll see to the trackers," he said. "And the witches. We'll find where they crossed in." "You'll find more than that," the Alpha corrected softly. "You'll find why they risked coming so close." He turned back toward the hall, the instinct pulling him homeward as strong and undeniable as a tide. "And you?" the beta asked. He paused at the top of the stairs, one hand resting on the carved stone railing. For a moment, the hard edge in his gaze softened, replaced by something almost vulnerable. "I," he said, "am going to say goodbye to my son before I go to war for him." It was the first time he gave the bond a name aloud. The word son seemed to tremble in the air between them, fragile and powerful all at once. The beta lowered his head, a rare flicker of emotion crossing his face. "Then the moon rise with you, Alpha," he murmured. "The moon has already chosen," the Alpha replied, and disappeared into the hall. The corridors felt different now, less like stone and more like bone, less like a fortress, and more like ribs curved around a heart. He moved quickly, but not so quickly that he lost awareness of everything around him. The flicker of flames, the quiet footsteps of servants who pressed themselves against the walls as he passed, the way whispers died on tongues the moment he came into view. His scent carried through these corridors like a storm front. Behind it, faint but present, lingered the softer, newer scent that had joined it tonight. His heir, his son. He pushed open the door to his chambers with a gentler hand than usual. Inside, the space was dim, lit only by the faint glow of coals in the hearth and the filtered light of the moon spilling through the window. It stroked the room in shades of blue and silver, softening the edges of the stone, making the bed and the furs and the cradle seem almost unreal, like a dream he'd wake from if he blinked too hard. He didn't blink. He crossed the room silently, boots sinking into the rug, shoulders loosening for the first time since he'd stepped into the courtyard. All the armor he wore around others, the command, the iron, the cold composure, melted away in increments as he approached the cradle. The toddler was still there, nestled among the furs, one small fist tucked beneath his cheek, lips parted in quiet sleep. The moonlight found him easily, tracing the curve of his temple, the soft sweep of lashes, the faint pale crescent mark, like a secret kissed onto his skin. The Alpha's chest tightened again. He stood there for a long moment, simply watching, memorizing, allowing himself a rare luxury, stillness without vigilance, silence without threat. Then, slowly, he crouched beside the cradle, lowering himself until he was close enough to feel the warmth of the child's breath on his skin. He rested one forearm on the edge of the wood, the other hand hovering for a heartbeat, before finally settling gently over the toddler's tiny torso. The rise and fall of the little body under his palm was the most grounding sensation he had felt in years. "I should not have you," he said softly. The confession meant only for the child, for the moon, for whatever listened in the spaces between breaths. "I wasn't meant to. The world decided long ago I would rule alone. The war saw to that." His gaze darkened, but his hand never moved. "Yet here you are," he breathed. "Cry on my border, scent in my lungs, blood in my hands." He swallowed once, the sound quiet but heavy. "I don't know if your mother lives," he continued, voice raw with a sharp honesty he never let anyone else hear. "I don't know if she held you when you took your first breath, or if they tore you from her arms before she could even speak your name." His fingers curled subtly, a tremor running through them. "But I know this," he said, and now his voice steadied into something that belonged not just to a man, but to a king. "You will not be stolen again. Not by magic, not by enemies, not by fate itself. If the world wants to pry you from me, it will have to break my hands bone by bone first." The toddler's eyelids fluttered. For a heartbeat, a pair of eyes, too large, too innocent, too familiar, peered up at him through the darkness, unfocused but searching. Something in the Alpha's chest lurched forward, as if his heart itself were trying to bridge the small distance between them. The child's mouth moved silently, a soft, broken sound slipping free. Not a word, just a note. But it felt like the echo of a name long unsaid. The alpha bent over the cradle, his shadow spilling over the child like a shield. "Sleep," he whispered. "I'll be back before you wake." He realized, even as he said it, that he couldn't promise that. War didn't bend for vows spoken in the dark. But he said it anyway, because some promises weren't made to be realistic. They were made to be anchors. The toddler's eyes drifted closed again, trusting without comprehension. He brushed his knuckles lightly against the child's hair one last time, then straightened, the weight of his role sliding back over him like armor being strapped into place. His jaw set. His gaze hardened. His spine lengthened. He turned toward the weapons rack near the far wall, where his sword hung in its sheath, polished and waiting. The sword had seen decades of battle. Its hilt was worn by his grip, its edge honed with care that bordered on reverence. He took it down with both hands, feeling its weight settle into his palms with the familiarity of an old companion. The metal gleamed faintly in the dim room, catching the last light from the dying fire. He strapped the belt around his waist with steady movements, each buckle, each pull tightening more than leather. It tightened his resolve, his anger, his strange new fear. He took one last look around his chamber, the fire, the bed, the shelves of books and relics, the cradle glowing softly in the moonlight. This room would not be the same when he returned. He would not be the same. He paused at the door, hand resting on the handle, and spoke without turning. "Guard him," he said. The command wasn't directed at a physical presence. It was addressed to the stones, to the old magic, to the house wolves sleeping in the walls, to the moon itself, to anything that answered to him, to his blood, to his line. "Guard him," he repeated, voice carrying the full force of an alpha's will, "until I bring back the rest of what they took from us." Then he opened the door and stepped through. The hallways were busier now, but quieter, the kind of quiet that hummed with preparation. Warriors moved like shadows with purpose. Witches glided with bowls of water and lengths of bone. Trackers knelt with their noses close to fabric and air, memorizing faint threads of forbidden scent. The beta waited at the base of the stairwell, hand resting on the hilt of his own blade, eyes already shining with the faint glow of his wolf. "The hunters are ready," he said. "The witches say the trail is fresh, very fresh. They didn't expect us to move this fast." The alpha's lips twisted in something that almost resembled a smile, sharp and humorless. "Good," he said. "Let them learn quickly." He moved past the beta, through the archway that led to the outer gate. The night met him there, cold and keen and full of distant sounds. The rustle of trees, the murmur of wolves, the soft scrape of claws on stone as some patrol shifted shape nearby. He drew in a breath of it, letting the scents flood his senses. Pine, earth, smoke, and beneath it, faint but taunting, the sharp edge of exile magic. They were close, closer than they had any right to be. He stepped out beyond the gate, boots leaving the smooth stone of the courtyard for the rough, damp soil of the open ground. Behind him, the pack followed like a living tide, lines of warriors fading into wolf shapes one by one, fur rippling into existence where armor had been. The sound of bones shifting, of skin stretching, of breath turning from human to animal filled the air with a chorus of transformation. He did not shift, not yet. He stood at the front of the gathered pack, mantle of alpha wrapped around him like a cloak made of shadow and moonlight. He lifted his gaze one last time to the upper tower where his chambers were. The window was dark now, only the faintest glow hinting at the fire within. He couldn't see the cradle from here, couldn't see the child, but he felt him, a small, steady presence in his chest, a second heartbeat. He closed his eyes. For a moment he saw her, not as a ghost, not as a memory softened by time, but as she had been. Alive, fierce, defiant, eyes bright with something that had always matched his own rage, and yet calmed it at the same time. He heard her voice in his mind, clear and stubborn. "If fate ever tries to take something from us, we take it back." He opened his eyes. The moon shone full and bright on his face, painting the edges of his irises with pale light. His wolf pressed against his skin, ready, willing, waiting for the signal. He gave it. The shift tore through him like fire and wind and bone-splitting power, but he embraced it, welcomed it, let the world spin and steady again on 4 paws, His massive wolf form stood at the head of the pack, fur dark as midnight, eyes burning like storm-silver embers. The moon-marked line of his blood glowed faintly along his spine, a subtle echo of the crescent on his son's skin. He tilted his head back and howled, not with grief, not with despair, but with a promise that rolled over the land like thunder. He was coming, for answers, for blood, for her, for the child who had cried at his border and changed everything. The pack answered his howl, voices rising into a wild, unified chorus that shook the trees and startled the birds from their branches. The forest seemed to bow under the weight of it. Then, without another pause, the alpha turned toward the dark line of the woods where the exile's scent lingered like a provocation and surged forward, the pack thundering behind him like a living storm. Far behind, in the quiet chamber bathed in moonlight, a toddler shifted in his sleep, a tiny hand reaching outward as if feeling the echo of that howl in his bones. The crescent mark near his temple pulsed softly, like a whispered answer. Father. The night closed around them all. Breath held, waiting. The war for blood and destiny had begun. And this was only the first move.